The committee will come to order. I want to first off welcome each of our nominees and to your friends and families who are joining you here today. Certainly thank you to your prior public service and your willingness to serve in these important positions. The Federal Maritime Commission plays an essential role in American shipping and the global economy. It regulates shipping lines to keep them fair and competitive and protects our country's interest in this industry. This agency doesn't just help international trade go more smoothly, it also keeps the American economy humming. It's more important than ever that we confirm qualified people to the FMC, and in this instance, retain the leadership and the expertise provided by Chairman Daniel Maffei and Commissioner Rebecca Dye. The Ocean Shipping Reform Act was signed into law last summer and provided the FMC with a number of new authorities. If these nominees are confirmed, they will be equipped with new tools to address supply chain challenges and investigate unfair practices. For instance, the Ocean Shipping Reform Act established new practices for detention and demurrage. This is one of the key duties of this commission, ensuring that American shippers are not being charged unfair fees and in turn lowering costs for consumers across Michigan as well as our entire country. Authorities like these help FMC commissioners do their job and meet the demand of record caseload. I look forward to hearing how our nominees plan to continue implementing these new policies and other oversight responsibilities of the FMC. As a Michigander, I am also interested in our nominees and what they have to say about the Great Lakes. Our ports and shippers are the pillar of American shipping industry. Our state has a unique regulatory environment for the FMC, and I hope to learn more about how they plan to keep our state's shipping lines running effectively. And finally, the duties of this commission intersect with safety and international security. Conflicts abroad can lead to attacks on commercial American ships, as we've seen recently across the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. The FMC has to monitor issues like this and respond to their effects on American stakeholders in the shipping industry. These are just a few examples of the work that these nominees will tackle if they are confirmed to this commission. Today's hearing gives us a chance to hear from them directly, as well as to dive deeper into their experience, their qualifications, and vision for the Federal Maritime Commission. Ranking Member Cruz is recognized as soon as he has a chance to get set up here for any opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're here today to consider the renominations of two experienced public services to the Federal Maritime Commission, or FMC. I want to thank FMC Chairman Daniel Maffei and Commissioner Rebecca Dye for their willingness to continue their important work. During the pandemic, supply chains suffered unprecedented shocks. A spike in demand for consumer goods outstripped capacity to transport those goods. As an understandable reaction to the delays, many businesses ordered excess inventory to compensate for the longer transit times, compounding a cycle and worsening congestion. Senators Thune and Klobuchar worked on a tailored bipartisan solution to ensure the FMC had the tools it needed to properly oversee ocean transportation practices, resulting in the Ocean Shipping Reform Act of 2022. I look forward to hearing about the FMC's actions to implement this legislation. Unfortunately, in recent months, just after ocean shipping prices and transit times began to normalize, international instability threatens to make ocean transportation less affordable and efficient. Iranian-backed terrorists are causing death and costly destruction across the Middle East. In support of Hamas in Gaza, the Houthis have fired dozens of missiles and armed drones at U.S. naval forces and cargo ships transiting the Red Sea. This threat has caused many carriers to avoid the Suez Canal in favor of the much longer but safer journey around Africa. As a result, the spot rate for ocean shipping has increased to a level that is roughly 250% the going rates in early November. It is understandable why carriers might increase rates to transit around Africa. In turn, the FMC may use its authority to monitor these rate hikes. But we should recognize that neither shippers nor the FMC can address the underlying causes of this most recent disruption. That responsibility lies squarely with President Biden. His weakness on the international stage has unfortunately emboldened our enemies. The inexplicable strategy of appeasing Iran has backfired spectacularly. America must project strength. We must support Israel and oppose terrorists. The failure to do so has invited violence that threatens international commerce in addition to U.S. security. As we consider the challenges facing ocean shipping today, it is important to recognize how mistakes on the world stage have serious economic consequences. Again, Chairman Maffei and Commissioner Dye, I look forward to the discussion of your past and ongoing efforts to protect American businesses and consumers who rely on ocean transportation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ranking Member Cruz. Our first nominee, Dan Maffei, has sat on the FMC since 2016 and is currently the chairman of the commission. This is the latest chapter in a long career of public service for Mr. Maffei, including as a member of the U.S. House of Representatives for 2 terms, where I was proud to call him one of my colleagues. I'm honored to preside over his nomination hearing and look forward to learning more about his work with the FMC today. Chairman Maffei, it's a true pleasure to have you before us here today, and you're now recognized for your opening remarks.
Thank you, Chairman Peters, also Ranking Member Cruz and members of the committee. I thank you for this opportunity to speak before you today. I know it's a very busy day, so I appreciate the time. I also want to thank the full committee chair, Maria Cantwell, and both the Democratic and Republican staffs for their help and guidance in this process. The last time I was here, the ocean link supply chains that served our nation were indeed in crisis. Ports were congested, some of them with dozens of hulking container ships waiting at anchor for days to be unloaded. Stores and warehouses were running low on consumer products, and farm exports were sometimes rotting while waiting for an available container or space on a ship. Now, 2 years later, I can report COVID-related congestion ended last year. Cargo is now flowing fluidly, shippers can secure their needed equipment, and exports are getting space on outgoing ships. But of course, much of the improvement resulted from shifts in supply and demand occurring as the world emerged from COVID. However, clearly a large factor was also the FMC's work in addressing many of the issues that tangled up America's supply chains. An example involves detention and demurrage fees charged by carriers and marine terminals that are supposed to incentivize the efficient movement of cargo. During COVID, the system broke down, resulting in supply chain gridlock, even while American businesses felt they were being unfairly charged. Thanks to the work of the Commission, starting with Commissioner Dye's 2020 unanimously approved interpretive rule, the system has markedly improved, and a new billing rule required under OSRA and made public in final form last week will further ensure these fees serve their intended purpose. During COVID and ongoing to promote compliance, the FMC initiated our VOCC audit program consisting of regular discussions with all the major carriers about their supply chain challenges and ocean shipping practices. Many carriers have greatly improved in terms of service and responsiveness to U.S. importers and exporters due to this program. The potential for abuse, however, in any industry is always higher if companies believe they'll never get caught. At the start of the pandemic, it had been years since the Federal Maritime Commission brought a major case against an international container line, and virtually no civil fines were collected by the FMC in FY20 and FY 2021, despite much discontent with foreign-flagged carriers. With a reorganization of the FMC, enforcement personnel, and priorities, the Commission turned this around. The FMC collected nearly $2 million in fines during FY22 and almost $2.9 million in FY23, most of which from container ship operators. This does not include the restitution to impacted shippers that carriers in these cases provided, nor does it include settlements to U.S. shippers who brought private cases before the Commission. Overall, this continues to be the most intense period in our agency's 54-year history. We might have become overwhelmed and had far fewer successes if not for Congress passing, on a bipartisan basis, the Ocean Shipping Reform Act. That law, authored by committee members Klobuchar and Thune and signed by the President in June 2022, strengthened FMC's authority and provided resources needed to enhance enforcement and consumer services. As America's importers and exporters realized the FMC was able and willing to help, we got a whole many more cases. In fact, in the first 2 months of 2024, we have almost nearly twice as many enforcement cases already as we had in the entire year of 2020. To handle this growing caseload, we've had to go from 1 administrative law judge to 3, and our Consumer Affairs Division now handles an average of 100 requests per month, many times what they handled pre-COVID. Thanks to its dedicated commissioners and personnel and additional authority and resources provided by OSRA, FMC has evolved into a stronger regulatory agency and helped restore confidence in America's ocean shipping supply system. But not all the news is good. The ocean-linked supply chains responsible for trillions of dollars of U.S. economic activity remain vulnerable, as Senator Cruz pointed out. The Houthis' unprovoked attacks on commercial vessels transiting the Suez Canal suddenly meant a rerouting of roughly 30% of global container shipping. This comes at the same time as the Panama Canal's unexpected reduction in capacity. Add to that a slew of other challenges, including shifting carrier alliances, potential trade disputes, and increasing threats of piracy and cargo theft, and any major U.S. importer or exporter has plenty to worry about. Given this context of supply chain uncertainty, it is paramount that the FMC do all it can to maintain a competitive and reliable international ocean transportation system and protect the public from unlawful, unfair, and deceptive practices. Working closely with Commissioner Dye, my fellow commissioners, Commissioner Vekich and Commissioner Bensel and Commissioner Sola, who's here today, and a small but top-notch professional staff, I have helped put the FMC on course to accomplish this vital mission. I respectfully ask that the committee support both me and Commissioner Dye in continuing that work. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Well, thank you, Chairman Maffei. Our second nominee, Rebecca Dye, has been a commissioner of the FMC since 2002. She has been reappointed and confirmed 3 times, first by President Bush and subsequently by President Obama. Prior to joining the commission, Ms. Dye served as counsel in various offices of the U.S. Coast Guard, U.S. Maritime Administration, and the U.S. House of Representatives. Commissioner Dye, it's a pleasure to have you before us here today. You are now recognized for your opening comments.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that introduction. I want to say, first of all, that I appreciate my colleague, Lou Sola, who's here today to support us. And I really appreciate the opportunity to testify here today before you. It's an honor to appear as renominated by President Biden to serve as a commissioner at the Federal Maritime Commission. I welcome the opportunity, if confirmed, to continue the important work of the commission at this critical time for the nation's freight delivery system. I've been fortunate to serve with excellent colleagues at the commission during my tenure. Our current chairman, Dan Maffei, is the best partner I could ask for as we carry out the responsibilities of the commission. During the past 5 years of the commission, I've been honored that my colleagues placed their trust in me to serve as fact-finding officer in 2 investigations to address major concerns of U.S. exporters and importers. The first, fact-finding 28, stemmed from a petition filed at the commission by the Coalition for Fair Port Practices, a broad coalition of shippers and others concerned with detention and demurrage fees charged by ocean carriers, seaports, and marine terminal operators. I recommended and the commission approved an approach to address detention and demurrage practices based upon a principle, the incentive principle. If cargo owners cannot be further incentivized to pick up cargo or return equipment, no charge may be assessed. The incentive principle was embodied in a commission rule. Though characterized as an interpretive rule, it's enforceable, and the commission has moved forward with investigations and cases to enforce it. I'm pleased to say that this effort is bearing fruit and changing behavior in the marketplace. I'm gratified that OSRA 22 recognized and ratified the interpretive ruling and gives the commission the opportunity to further clarify specific practices that would be unreasonable under the general incentive principle. The second investigation, fact-finding 29, International Ocean Transportation Supply Chain Engagement, was ordered to address problems in the U.S. supply chain caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. As a result of my investigation, I recommended statutory and administrative changes to Congress and the Commission. I appreciate your support of the implementation of my statutory recommendations. The Commission is moving forward with the final fact-finding 29 recommendations to address supply chain problems that occurred during the pandemic. Most important among these recommendations is a new Commission International Ocean Shipping Supply Chain Program with dedicated personnel. Second is the new FMC Ocean Carrier Compliance Program, including a new requirement for ocean common carriers, seaports, and marine terminals to employ an FMC compliance officer. And I'm pleased that our carriers very quickly did nominate compliance officers, and it has been a great aid to us in transmitting our intent for obeying the law. Both recommendations have been implemented by the Commission. If confirmed, I look forward to working with Chairman Maffei and my colleagues to maintain the professionalism of our flagship competition program among ocean carriers, seaports, and marine terminals, to increase stakeholder outreach, and work with FMC supply chain innovation teams to craft clear and predictable commercial solutions to address supply chain bottlenecks. I pledge to work closely with the members of this committee to make our nation's supply chain more dependable and responsive to the needs of American importers and exporters. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Dye. Chairman Maffei, as you mentioned, both of you in your opening remarks, in June of 2022, we saw the Ocean Shipping Reform Act signed into law. OSRA provided the FMC with additional authorities to address international ocean shipping transportation-related supply chain challenges, along with improved tools to investigate unfair shipping practices and fees and other charges. OSRA also amended the Shipping Act to prohibit international ocean carriers from unreasonably denying U.S. cargo and established a certification process for detention and demurrage charges to improve transparency and enforcement. And Chairman Maffei, I know you talked about that in your opening remarks, but perhaps you could provide the committee with a little more detailed update as to FMC's progress in utilizing these additional authorities and improved tools provided by the law, and any other comments related to the law that you think it's important for this committee to hear.
Absolutely, Senator Peters. And I very briefly do want to recognize that Max Vekich, the first commissioner we've ever had from the state of Washington, is also actually here today. So we both have Commissioner Sola and Vekich in our audience, and I appreciate, and I know Commissioner Dye appreciates their support. Look, I'm a very fortunate person in that when I wake up in the morning, I don't have to do a to-do list because my to-do list was written by the Senate Commerce Committee, endorsed by a vast bipartisan majority in the Senate, and yes, even the House, and signed by the President of the United States. OSRA implementation is the top priority of the Commission. My top priority within that is now, particularly now that the detention demurrage billing rule is done, to get the mandated rule addressing unreasonable refusal to deal for importers, exporters finished. You mentioned the unreasonably denying U.S. cargo, which is clearly now illegal thanks to the Ocean Shipping Reform Act. When we started our process, the act actually mandates the refusal to deal part of it. It did not mandate in this first rule that we put unreasonable denying of cargo. However, when we came out with our first draft, nobody liked it on either side. And we realized, and at least I realized, that we needed to also make sure that unreasonably denying cargo was in the same rule as not allowing any sort of unreasonable refusal to deal. We rewrote the rule, we put it back out in a supplemental rulemaking. That has taken a little bit longer than I wanted, but I think we're gonna have a much better result that our exporters, whether we're talking about cherries from Michigan or cotton from Texas, are definitely going to like, and I expect that to be out in the next few months in final form. I have kept in touch with all those groups, by the way, in the meantime, and fortunately, because of market forces, it is not as urgent as it could have been, but we will make sure that's out. In the meantime, by the way, denying U.S. cargo unreasonably is illegal, of course, and we can enforce that. Look, we are on all cylinders firing on the enforcement and consumer stuff, particularly given that that was a major priority in OSRA. You mandated that we hire 7 people in various roles. We hired 9 in those roles. We continue to up our enforcement efforts. We've hired a senior executive service level person to oversee our enforcement. We've hired actually even before the bill, but now it corresponds with the bill, an export advocate within our Consumer Affairs Division, and we continue every day to keep the pressures on. There are a number of other requirements in OSRA, frankly, a dozen or more, that we've completed, and I'm happy to provide you with a list of those in writing, but I don't think we need to get into that here.
Well, very good, Chairman Maffei. And as you recall from our days serving in the House together, where I believe your district included the first port of call into the Great Lakes. Right. We can't forget about the important role that Great Lake shipping always plays in our economy. And I believe that part of the solution to preventing the congestion supply chain disruptions that we saw following the pandemic is to make better use of our ports in the Great Lakes. Our Great Lakes ports can play a significant role in easing congestion at coastal ports, improving the efficient movement of freight and reducing emissions in the process. However, in order to achieve these goals, we need to ensure that all seaports have equitable access to federal resources and are also held to the same standards. And that's why I'm committed to working with our smaller seaports as they work to balance security concerns and evolving threats with port business operations needed to move that freight. My question for you, Chairman Maffei, is can you comment on the role our Great Lakes ports can play in alleviating congestion at these larger ports and through the supply chain?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I love the question, of course, Senator Peters being from, I think I might be the first chairman that comes from a Great Lakes area of the country. I think it already plays an important role. There is, now most of Great Lakes shipping is not containerized. It's bulk shipping, et cetera, break bulk of liquid fuels, et cetera. And there are certain issues there, but in terms of container shipping, which is what we primarily regulate, there is indeed a container service to the Great Lakes. It goes from Antwerp to Cleveland. Of course, it's seasonal. And it has been very, very successful. So successful, in fact, that the Port of Duluth is also considering container shipping, and I think also Monroe, Michigan. Mm-hmm. It is extraordinarily helpful. For instance, during the pandemic, a rubber manufacturer in Houston, Texas, which found that the Port of Houston, although a fantastic port, was basically at its capacity. Ships didn't have any more space. So what they did was, in order to get their product to Europe, they sent it up to Cleveland and exported it on containers out of Cleveland. So indeed, I think an expansion of services along the Great Lakes would help the entire country because it would add to that ability to diversify the supply chains.
Right. Thank you, Chairman Maffei. Ranking Member Cruz, recognized for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it. Welcome to both the commissioners. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your service. Last month, the FMC held a hearing on the impact of the Houthi attacks in the Red Seas and to hear from stakeholders. I'd be interested in your telling the committee, what did you learn at that hearing?
Yeah, Senator, I think the biggest thing that I learned, and I want to yield to my Commissioner Dye, if you allow, but was that there really has been a lack of transparency. It's not so much, as you mentioned in your opening statement, obviously carriers faced with the prospect of their crews and officers being put at risk shouldn't put them at risk for a single shipment. Nonetheless, when you have a threat to freedom of the seas and they do have to go around, they do charge more because there are additional fees, and it does change the market because a ship taking longer will be less available to carry other cargoes. And they did put in some of these fees to compensate for that. However, the consumer, the shippers, exporters and importers really had no idea, no way of knowing whether those were fair. And so what we've tried to do already is start putting through our VOCC audit program, asking these questions, trying to get answers, and trying to encourage the ocean carriers to be more transparent. So the transparency was the number one thing. Better transparency, I think, would help everybody figure out whether they're getting their money's worth.
Commissioner Dye, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Yes, Yes, thank you, Senator Cruz. The two main costs that carriers are incurring are fuel and wear and tear on the ships. They also have to acquire additional capacity by charter, and significant new tonnage is coming in to the marketplace as well. Shippers are concerned and suspicious about the amount of the surcharges. And we understand that. I definitely understand that after having heard the complaints and concerns during the steep rise in prices during the pandemic. It's our responsibility to make sure that those surcharges are reasonable. We, during the hearing, assured the shippers that we would do that, and that we're in the process now of making sure. As I understand it, the rate of increase is comparable to what happened during the pandemic, but the actual price is short of that. And as the carriers begin to negotiate with their contract shippers, then what we hope to see is a moderation.
So what has the impact been so far to American consumers and American businesses of these Houthi attacks in the Red Sea?
Well, the impact so far has been relatively limited because even though I mentioned 30% of containerized traffic, that's global containerized traffic. The U.S. is less of that. It's really the combined effect of the Suez situation with the Panama Canal situation that has created an issue because of, mostly due to lack of capacity. Fitch estimates that could lead to approximately 0.4% of inflation. However, the good news, if you can call it that, is that there are a lot of new ships coming online over the next few months. During COVID, most of these carriers ordered a great deal more capacity because they were so short during COVID, and those ships will come online. I think once that happens, provided we at the Commission do what we need to do to preserve the fact that there's competition, market competition, that even if the situation in the Red Sea continues, the rates will go down. They may not go down to where they were last year, but they will decline to a more acceptable level.
So one of the things both of you talked about in your opening testimony were detention and demurrage fees, and as you discussed during the pandemic, some ports applied what they called dwell fees on containers that were not picked up in time. Notably, the Port of Los Angeles and Long Beach took these fees to the extreme. They started at $100 per day after the 9th day on a terminal, and they increased by $100 a day. This could lead to an extraordinary sum, $46,500 in just 30 days. Now, if I understood your testimony as well, you both said that you thought detention and demurrage fees should be used to actually incentivize the movement of goods. Is that correct as to your understanding? And how would the new rule that you released operate? Port of Los Angeles and Long Beach have rescinded the dwell fees, but if they had stayed in place, how would the new rule have impacted those fees?
The fees were not described as demurrage and detention fees. But our position was if it walks like, quacks like demurrage and detention, it's subject to our rules. All of our shippers, our importers, were under pressure because, as we said before, they had ordered an overwhelming supply of goods to respond to American consumers during that time. And they didn't have anywhere to put it. And so the cargo continued to build on the ports. They couldn't even move the containers around. Shippers were finding other property to store cargo. And it was a terrible time for everybody. Regardless, we made plain to LA that those were not reasonable fees under the incentive principle. And we were pleased that they didn't actually move to collect those.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ranking Member Cruz. Chairman Maffei, I understand that in 2005, the FMC helped the Lake Carriers Association with an investigation regarding the Canadian Coast Guard charging U.S. Lakers significantly higher harbor service fees than they charged Canadian Lakers moving the exact same cargo between the United States and Canada. I also understand that they have recently asked you to proceed with another investigation regarding a Transport Canada issue. And as I think you know, it's incredibly important that American Lakers have the ability to effectively move cargo on the Great Lakes, including between the United States and Canada. So my question for you, Chairman Maffei, is first of all, I want to thank you for the FMC efforts on this issue to date. But could you assure me and the committee that you'll look into this issue and perhaps comment on how important it is to make sure that we get a fair resolution to this?
I am happy to assure you of that. The Lake Carriers petition has been investigated by the Commission for some time. There was we were waiting for other agencies of the United States and to see this, whether the situation would evolve to a point where the petition would no longer be needed. However, it is needed. The Lake Carriers have reasserted this petition. Now, I do have to be careful here because I cannot talk about this particular case because it is an ongoing investigation. But I can tell you what this is, what part of the law this is, and how that works, and assure you that I will be I believe all members of the Commission are very interested in making sure that we do our duty towards this. Under Section 19 of the Merchant Marine Act of 1920, the FMC has the authority to take action when conditions unfavorable to shipping in the foreign trade exist. For example, I'll use a different example. In February '97, the Commission found that certain port regulations in Japan discriminated against U.S. shippers in Japanese harbors, and the FMC ordered a fee of $100,000 back then per each cargo vessel of the three major Japanese carriers that was brought into a U.S. port. This is the kind of thing that can happen if we indeed find that any other government has created a condition that discriminated against U.S. shippers.
Well, thank you. Thank you. This next question is to each of you. We'll start with Ms. Dowie first. Michigan's agricultural industry is expected to export about $2.2 billion in agricultural products. It plays a vital role in supporting our state's economy. Export opportunities are critical for success of our agricultural sector, as it is, of course, all over the country. But supply chain disruptions, when they occur, threaten our farmers' ability to market their products around the globe. So I want to ask each of you, if you'd let the committee know how rulemakings the FMC is working on now will actually ensure reliable supply chains for our agricultural exports. So what can I tell my farmers and other folks in the agricultural industry is being done to ensure that for them?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I am very pleased with the response that we have received on our recent demurrage and detention billing rule from exporters in particular, and their truckers, especially in LA Long Beach. The clarity and predictability of the rule's requirements assure that exporters do not have to spend time tracking down an invoice that's six months old, because today the bills have to be sent in 30 days, which is a reasonable amount of time. And so the effectiveness of the approach in this rule will make sure that they save money, and I think that's the most important thing at this point.
Great, thank you. Chairman Maffei.
Yeah, Senator, as I already talked about, the specific rule that will be coming out that will help us enforce the prohibition against unreasonably denying cargo. That is important. However, there are a lot of other important initiatives that the Commission is working on. Part of the challenge with these shipments is the unpredictability, generally speaking, of when ships are going to leave, the possibility of what we call blank sailing when a ship doesn't go. These affect all cargo importers and exporters, but particularly agricultural exporters who may have a shelf life of their product or whose product is desperately needed. If you need protein products from dairy farms in Michigan and to feed your people, you cannot necessarily put those off. So Commissioner Dye has done a lot of good work on this. He's sometimes too modest about how to, working with her supply chain task forces to make sure to figure out better ways of predicting these things and how that we can get those to shippers. This is not a completely government approach. We're not going to mandate things, I don't think, but what we're talking about is using our power as conveners. To help get things together. I will be attending the agricultural shippers conference this year. I think usually we sort of alternate those, but always at least one commissioner is there to sort of see how we can be helpful there. And then the enforcement is extraordinarily important, and the fact, particularly on detention and demurrage, that the FMC now is willing to stand up for America's shippers, particularly America's agricultural exporters, to ensure that they are given fair treatment. So there's a lot of stuff that we do. And, and I did mention, I think already, but just in case I didn't, there's a specific advocate for exports in our Consumer Affairs Division that can be called on if an exporter has an issue and just doesn't know what to do. I mean, not everything falls into an easy category of file a case with the FMC or get the FMC to investigate it or call the carrier and ask them to waive a fee. So we have a specific person assigned to that in our Consumer Affairs Division.
Great, thank you. Final issue I want to raise for both of you and hear your thoughts, something that I know you agree in, but investing in the modernization of our ports so that they can handle bigger ships and prevent congestion is absolutely critical for our entire national economy. In fact, by 2045, port infrastructure investments could produce economy-wide returns of between $2 to $3 per every dollar spent. That's a real good return on an investment over that time period. That's why I led and strongly supported efforts to increase the funding for the Maritime Administration's Ports Infrastructure Development Program, which is the PIDP grants. These grants can be used to fund the port infrastructure needed to improve freight mobility, address port congestion, and improve port competitiveness. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act that we passed contains $17 billion for investing in our port infrastructure and waterways, including $2.25 billion for the PIDP. Now, the express purpose of this funding is to be used in modernizing port infrastructure, making it more resilient and sustainable, and to help remove bottlenecks as well as reduce some environmental impacts. So I'd like to hear from both of you, if you could speak as to how these increased investments in our port infrastructure, such as what was contained in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, as well as our Build Back Better Act that passed recently through Congress and signed by President Biden, will help alleviate congestion in our ports throughout the supply chain. Commissioner Dye, you want to start, and then Chairman Maffei, you can wrap it up.
Thank you very much. Of course, our executive directors of our ports are impressive people. And their recommendations for what they need in their ports is the best place to start. I'm familiar with the MARAD program, and I know it's very well regarded among port directors. And of course, all infrastructure, roads and other infrastructure directly related to the port can help alleviate bottlenecks.
Thank you, Commissioner. Chairman Maffei.
Yeah, I mean, I want to make sure I'm wearing the right hat for this because, of course, when I was a congressman, I was a huge supporter of these things, and unfortunately, we could not get that passed when I was in Congress. But it is true that it's not in our jurisdiction, of course, to administer any of these programs. But in terms of the supply chain that we care about and we monitor, it is extraordinarily important that, in my view, that the country continue to make those investments. I think Commissioner Dye is absolutely right. If you want to build better railroad, if you want to build bridges in Indiana or in Michigan, that helps us on the coasts. It helps us everywhere. It's one integrated supply chain system. And I think one of the lessons of COVID is that you can even have ports that are operating relatively well, but they'll still look completely clogged because of the lack of infrastructure or other sorts of things. So this money, is my understanding, can be used for all sorts of port improvements. LA and Long Beach have both found land that's not exactly on the water, but helps in the event that they have a surge in cargo. And I will give you one example from the past. The port that I'm most familiar with, the port of New York, New Jersey, the major port I'm most familiar with, did the difficult task of raising a bridge, the Bayonne Bridge. That didn't just help the Port of New York and New Jersey and ports in the Northeast or shippers in the Northeast. It helped the entire coast. It helped Savannah in Senator Warnock's state. And the reason is because when ships come, they make a first call and then they may make a last call. So anyone in that vicinity is helped. Improving Houston helps the Port of Gulfport. Improving San Francisco, it can help the ports in the Puget Sound. So yes, I think it's very, very important that the country continue these priorities, though, again, it's not anything that we would administer or get involved in. But generally speaking, it helps all of us and helps us do our job to make sure that there are good supply chain options.
We're expecting another member to be here shortly, so I get a chance to ask a few more questions. So, Chairman Maffei, the lake that allows the Panama Canal to function is at its lowest level since 1995 due to an extended lack of rainfall in that region. In response, the Panama Canal Authority has substantially scaled back daily traffic, limiting the number of vessels allowed to transit the canal from 38 ships a day down to 24, which is a significant reduction.
And it may go down even further is the plan for them. Sorry to interrupt.
That's okay. We're friends. You can do that. The Panama Canal handles roughly 40% of all U.S. container traffic and is critical for the transportation of energy commodities. So my question for you, Chairman Maffei, is in light of the situation in the Red Sea, can you speak to what FMC is doing to ensure that the Panama Canal drought does not compound all of these ongoing problems with delayed shipments and transportation cost? Are there things that you could be doing, and how concerned? You mentioned that this is going to get worse before it gets better. Is this something you lose sleep over?
I do lose sleep over it. You know me well, Senator. I lose sleep over things that other people probably wouldn't take note of. But and I am extraordinarily concerned about it. In terms of the FMC's role, that's a little more challenging. We do not want to overstep our authority in any of these ways. But I will say a couple of things. One is, obviously, there are additional fees associated with the Panama Canal transits that we do need to keep an eye on to make sure if there are extra fees. We don't regulate rates, but we can look at whether a fee is doing what it says and make sure it's not unreasonable in the way it is presented or an unreasonable rate increase in disguise. So we can take a look at that. We can also, look at the overall supply chain options that shippers have. That said, though, myself and Commissioner Lusola, who I mentioned is here today, are going to conduct a preliminary inquiry into the water level issues and Panama's handling of them to determine whether there are any other ways that the FMC can be helpful without overstepping our authority. The two of us have already talked about that, and we expect to commence that and probably make a fact-finding trip to Panama just to make sure that we have the appropriate information that we need to make that determination. I've tried to lengthen this answer, Mr. Chairman, but I think I'm done, so I'm going to, Mr. Chairman. You remember, Mr. Chairman, I didn't serve in the Senate, so I don't know how to filibuster.
I guess I can ask both of you to answer. After the pandemic, of course, we had all sorts of issues related to the pandemic, but actually truck chassis, the shortage of truck chassis was an element there. Could you give the committee an update as to what is happening, what actions can be taken, and what we should be thinking about the future? And clearly, some of the lessons learned in the pandemic are ones that we should take to heart, because let's hope there's not another pandemic for over 100 years, but we can't be assured of that, nor can we be assured of some other type of challenge confronting us. But if you could talk about truck chassis in general and the response to that, but perhaps other things that you learned from the pandemic that you think we should be thinking about in the future. And we can, if either one of you want to respond, whoever wants to go first.
Most recently, the Commission has released an order concerning a case that was filed by the American Trucking Association. And it concerns chassis, but the chassis are not an issue in that case. The issue was whether or not the so-called box rules that ocean carriers imposed on the railroads were reasonable under our authority on reasonable practices. Our ALJ issued an exhaustive opinion. The Commission reviewed it, and we affirmed her decision. So currently, there are certain issues that will be, by that order, referred back to the ALJ for decision. But in the meantime, the order on the unreasonableness of these box rules is in effect and can be enforced today. But if we don't regulate chassis.
Right.
And this is not an attempt to regulate chassis.
Correct.
But the ocean carriers do have contracts with them. But the case was about the ocean carriers' restrictions, not in any way the chassis themselves.
Thank you. Chairman Maffei.
Yes, Senator, I think the commissioner did well by that particular question. You also asked about lessons from COVID. I would say there are two specific lessons, one for the FMC and one for the FMC, but broadly speaking. The one for the FMC is that we can no longer afford, I think for many years, the FMC did a good job, a diligent job of setting the rules, but there wasn't necessarily a sense that you had to be a referee on the field. So you would set the rules, the game would be played, and then afterwards people could bring cases, or maybe if there was something egregious, the FMC would investigate. I think what COVID showed us is that unlike just setting the rules and letting the game be played, there needs to be a referee on the field. Shouldn't be playing the game, shouldn't be involved in the game, shouldn't be setting rates. Our market-based system has by and large worked for American shippers, but should be there making sure that the Shipping Act is enforced, that there are no unreasonable acts or discrimination, and that our competition rules are followed. And the second broader lesson is that the United States does remain vulnerable, and U.S. companies remain vulnerable because of the lack of diversification in their supply chains. You said that, hopefully there won't be another pandemic in 100 years, and that may very well be the case, but I can guarantee you there will be another crisis, and perhaps a confluence of crises, even worse potentially than we have now, that will affect shipping in a similar way. It is not predictable. Even if you could have predicted the COVID pandemic, I would submit to you that very few people predicted that the impact on shipping would be tremendous demand and no and not sufficient supply as opposed to the reverse. And so in that treacherous environment, and it's only becoming more treacherous as geopolitical factors contribute even more to the difficulties of America's importers or exporters, to the extent that we all can at the FMC, but at other agencies of government and even in the Congress, promote diversification of the supply chain, having companies do whatever they need to do, nearshoring, friendshoring, offshoring, Jersey shoring, whatever you need to do to make sure that that your factory won't be shut down, that you've given your products the best chance of being exported to their markets. And so that's, I mean, it's more of using my mini pulpit, but wherever I go, I try to remind shippers of that.
Well, thank you, Chairman Maffei. We're joined by the chair of the committee, Chair Cantwell.
Thank you, Senator Peters. Thank you so much for chairing this important hearing and nominations of our two colleagues back to the Federal Maritime Commission. And thank you for both being here and joined with also Commissioner Vekich. Thank you for being here. During COVID-19, you're just discussing this writ large, right? And I think the word that we're using is how do you de-risk your supply chain? And so, meaning you can't afford to have this level of risk in our supply chains that we saw during COVID. But with the offloading of imports and then leaving the dock without picking up American product and taking it back was the major issue. And in some cases, our agricultural products spoiled on the docks. So the Federal Shipping Act makes it unlawful to unreasonably deny cargo. The Commission didn't step up and put a stop to this problem during the pandemic, and that's why the Ocean Shipping Reform Act was required and the Commission to enter a rulemaking and to define what is unreasonable and put it into this practice once and for all. So Chairman Maffei, cargo stranded at ports harm American shippers, they harm our farmers, our fishermen, our businesses that rely on those ocean carriers to get their products to markets across the globe. So I was pleased to see an initial proposed rule on September 21st, 2022, followed by a second public comment period that closed last summer. But despite that progress, I'm concerned that we're not quite there yet. So what is the status of this unreasonable denial of cargo rulemaking? What can we do to help our farmers and business people get this final rule?
I do believe that the final rule is forthcoming in the next couple of months, and the reason for the delay, I don't believe is substantive. I think that the final rule will be very close to the supplemental rule, but it's very, very important that we do everything we can to, one, avoid any unintended consequences. We don't want to harm America's agricultural exports while trying to help them. I don't think that will happen, but we're going to make sure it doesn't. And secondly, we want to make sure that that it is bulletproof in terms of being challenged in front of the courts, and we are finishing that up. Getting the detention demurrage rule done is very important also, just because of
just one on that point, because you're making me think that you think intimidation by these foreign carriers to our agriculture economy, where they're going to retaliate if they don't like the rule that you're coming out with, is something you might be referring to, because we're not going to put up with that. We're not going to put up with foreign carriers intimidating our agriculture economy.
No, and we wouldn't at the FMC either, and you've given us the tools in OSRA 2022, I think, to enforce that greatly.
Well, you said you were going to do something, but not if you felt like it ultimately harmed farmers. And while we were working on this legislation, we heard the same kind of chatter, which is really the foreign carriers basically threatening retaliation. So I'm going to get to a second question that'll illuminate a little.
Yeah, I don't.
But just that comment you made, please don't focus on protecting American businesses. Focus on using our leverage. You want access to our ports? Guess what? There's rules to that. And that is that you call on our ports, you have to take stuff out of our ports. And you can't, have unreasonable scheduling where you aren't communicating with these customers.
Well said.
If you want to call on our ports.
Well said, Senator.
Okay, great. Okay, so I would like to hear from both you commissioners, Di and Maffei, on the fact, what else can we do to protect our businesses on this access to reasonable and reliable ocean shipping? What else do you think we should be doing?
Chair Cantwell, I think that we need to get ready now, that the supply chain needs to be strengthened. There are certain bottlenecks that occur every cargo surge and every peak season. And I've encouraged marine terminals in LA Long Beach, New York, New Jersey, to work with us and address these concerns now, because we know inevitably there will be other problems when the supply chain. We hope and pray that there won't be another pandemic, as Chairman Peters mentioned, but there will be another dislocation. And so I've started working with them, and we'll keep you informed on the progress, because I think that the system, the supply chain, needs to be strengthened. It will benefit the competitiveness of the United States overall, in addition to being more responsive to the needs of importers and exporters.
Okay, I was thinking broadly, but,
Yeah, no, I agree with what my colleague said, but may I also address the question?
yes, please.
Yeah, Madam Chair, one of the issues that has been a big problem is that a lot of, this happened during COVID, but frankly, it's been happening since before COVID, where agricultural shippers will show up with their cargo and there won't be enough space on the ship for the cargo, which is very puzzling because, of course, most of the time our ports are importing more than they're exporting. And so there's been some issues with that. And again, it particularly happened during COVID when actual space was becoming a problem, but sometimes, a ship would be, shipping would be canceled, what we call blank sailings or what have you. And so what they would do is start booking multiple times on various ships to make sure they could get this precious cargo, much of it perishable, to the markets where it was needed and where it was demanded. Then the ocean shipping companies, seeing all this overbooking, or seeing them overbook, started overbooking themselves and putting 120, 130% of their shipping, and that just created this death spiral, if you will. So unraveling that, I do think, is something the FMC could have a role in, and I would like to commence hearings on that. As soon as we kind of have the bandwidth. I think we have to get our rule out first, frankly, but we definitely think we need to do that. The other issue that I do keep an eye on is equipment. Our agricultural exports in particular need the right, not just a container, but the right kind of container. It has to be clean and in good condition. Sometimes it has to be what we call a reefer container or a refrigerated container. Often, because of the weight, the relative weight of agricultural exports, a 20-foot container is much more useful than a 40-foot container. And also a lot of our agricultural exports, most of them Washington State, but even in Washington State, they tend to be more in the eastern part of the state, Walla Walla, et cetera. That's not where the containers necessarily go with the consumer goods. So repositioning of containers is something else that I do think we should keep an eye on, both at the FMC and the Congress.
You mean delinking that? Some people have talked about delinking that, the ownership, so that you could have a more robust system.
I'm not necessarily advocating that now. I don't know enough about it, but I've heard that as a possibility. Another possibility, there could be some role for the Department of Agriculture. There's a number of different things that we could talk about.
Well, let me ask you about the detention and demurrage fees issue, because between 2020 and 2022, 9 of the largest carriers charged approximately $8.9 billion in demurrage and detention fees. These are fees above the cost of shipping. So just last week, the Commission published a final rule on detention and demurrage practices to help cut down on these costs and improve transparency. Can you tell me how this new rule will cut down on those costs facing shippers in the United States?
I can give you an example that directly affected exporters who did everything right. Their cargo was waiting on the dock, but the ship didn't pull in on time. And they were being charged fees for storage, although they had done everything according to port practices. And so that was one of the first things that I and my colleagues emphasized to ocean carriers that no charges will lie against an exporter under the incentive principle that, from our regulation, against exporters because the ship didn't fall in on time. And I'm pleased to say that the ocean carriers changed their systems to stop that. There are a few other examples like that, that our interpretative rule, the incentive principle, has outlawed. This is the first, these detention and demurrage fees are despised internationally. And the United States was really, we were the first ones who really took action to make sure that they serve the purpose for which they are intended.
Well, these are exorbitant fees passed on to the consumers, and we can't afford that. And so I don't know how confident you are that this rule is going to get rid of those exorbitant fees. Could you tell me?
I believe that we have, in the marketplace, there is much broader compliance. And of course, in OSRA, you provided a complaint process that if carriers don't actually mitigate or void fees, then shippers are free to come to the Federal Maritime Commission, and we will investigate.
Well, investigations is one thing I thought you would say when I said what, what more can you do? I would have thought maybe you would talk about your investigations, because you have done some good investigations.
Yes,
and
I misspoke, Chair Cantwell. We will certainly, if our investigation shows that the fee should not be charged, then we will either act with our enforcement, or what often happens is that the carriers will just void it voluntarily.
I'm sorry, they will void those.
They will not charge. They will
Thank you.
cancel the
Okay.
charge.
Sometimes they'll get scared off. Senator, I also want to bring up the charge complaints thing, because this was specific to OSRA, and it has put a fast track on the kinds of complaints that shippers might have on detention and demurrage, and that's been extraordinarily important, and in fact has resulted already in refunded or waived fees of $2 and $250,000, and these are often fairly small cases. So in terms of limiting the abuse of these fees, I think that program has a lot to do with it.
So you would say that the most important measures that you've been taking on the implementation of compliance with the Ocean Shipping Reform Act is these investigations? Is that, or are there other tools?
I don't like to choose between my children. All of the OSRA initiatives are extraordinarily important, but I think on detention and demurrage, it is a multifaceted issue. And I will say this, I do believe that our new D&D rule will be very, very effective in helping to eliminate some of the billing abuses. But there might still be more, and then we'll do another rule. We will fully enact both the OSRA, but also whatever we need to do to make sure that Senator Dye's authored initial interpretive rule that said these fees are for the promotion of the movement of cargo. They're not to pad the bottom line of an ocean shipping company. They're not for other purposes. They're supposed to be used for that, and if they're not used for that, they're unreasonable. And we will do whatever it takes until we get there.
Well, we'd like to see a report to the committee on what types of complaints you've investigated, what kind of enforcement actions, what kind of results have you had in driving down the cost to our consumers and businesses that are trying to be involved in international trade. And I guess if there's a meta message here, look, I hope that you are thinking about more competition, certainly more transparency, which that is probably your investigations and enforcement. But I also think we need to think about more technology. I'm a big fan of blockchain technology when it comes to an immutable manifest. So we should be moving towards some system where we know where everything is at every moment. It's just kept in a more private way. And that way we would get a lot of the mystery out of this situation and get a system that could be more dependable and reliable. I'm not asking you to necessarily lead the charge, but you can lead a discussion about what some of those options are to make shipping even more cost-effective in the United States. But I don't want, I represent a big trade state. I have a lot of people whose 90% of their product is exported. So we want to see a more aggressive FMC. We don't want to see a sleepy little agency when 95% of consumers live outside the United States. We want trade to work. We want, if you want to call on our market, we want you to know that there's rules to coming to our market and that we have an aggressive agency. And not going to gouge people, we are just going to stop people from being gouged. That's the key thing. And if you could lead that charge, then obviously we'll continue to work with you all, but we need an aggressive agency. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Before we close today's hearing, I have one more question, and we ask this of every nominee that comes before this committee. If confirmed, will you pledge to work collaboratively with this committee, provide thorough and timely responses to our request for information as we put together and address important policy issues, and would you appear before this committee when requested? So if we could answer yes or no, Commissioner Dye?
Yes, thank you.
Chairman Maffei?
Some would argue that I've tried to appear before this committee too much, but absolutely, Senator, and I think my record and the record of Commissioner Dye and the other commissioners in working with this committee in putting together the drafts of OSRA show that we've absolutely done that. It has been to the advantage of U.S. importers and exporters, and I certainly will continue to do that.
Well, very good. Well, I want to thank both of you. Thank both of you for being here today. I also want to congratulate you on your renomination for these important jobs and your willingness to take on this work. As is very clear with the questions that were posed today and your answers, this is a very serious business and one that's vitally important for our country and for our country's economy. Senators will have until close of business Monday, March 4th to submit questions for the record to the committee, and witnesses will have until close of business Monday, March 11th to respond to those questions. Thank you once again, and this now concludes today's hearing.